Restaurant Unstoppable, episode 723 with Jason Dady. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, Jason Dady. I should say Chef Jason Dady. Chef, are you feeling unstoppable today?
Every day, all day.
Yes, I love it. So, Nebraska native and Texan raised Jason Dady has deep roots in the restaurant industry. He studied hospitality management and culinary in Texas and California, respectively. After graduating, he sharpened his skills in Napa Valley before returning back to Texas, where he opened his first restaurant, the Lodge Restaurant of Castle Hills, in 2001. When one restaurant was not enough to hold his ideas, Chef Dady opened a second restaurant in 2004. And today, Chef Dady restaurants include Tre Trattoria at the San Antonio Museum of Art's Two Bros Barbecue Market and sister restaurant Alamo BBQ Co, B&D Ice House, Range, and Chispas. I said it right. Chispas the second time. Taco and Margs. I cannot wait to get into your story, but let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
Our mantra is make it happen and finish strong, and we try to live by that every day.
Make it happen and finish strong. How does that resonate with you? Really pull back the layers on that.
To me, make it happen in this business is there are no excuses. You have guests that are coming in and sitting down, and they are, they have an expectation, and you've got to make it happen. So it doesn't matter if there's a pandemic and people still want your food. You've got to figure out a way to make it happen and pivot towards delivery, or maybe you are 86 an ingredient but somebody still wanted gnocchi, and you only have a half hour to get it done. And finish strong is about making sure that you take pride in what you do to the very last plate, to the very last dish, to the very last guest, to the very last second. And that's what really, to me, has made us successful.
I love it, man. And when I think of just getting it done, it's just that mentality. Like it's never going to be perfect. That's one thing that's really cool about the restaurant industry is that you're always having to think outside the box because anything could happen, but you have to figure out how to make it right, right? So like that mentality is so significant in this industry. Where does it make sense to start telling your story?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I think, I don't have to completely dive into the childhood side, but because it's not that very exciting. I was born and raised in central Nebraska with a grandfather that was a butcher, and my other grandparents still to this day. My grandfather just turned 90, and they still run and operate a little bar, what we consider a dive bar. As a kid, it was more of a tavern. Maybe my grandma was cooking. And so I grew up, in some sense, in the hospitality industry. And so moved to Texas in 1989. Started working in a restaurant right out of high school, and then went to Texas Tech University and got my degree in restaurant hotel management.
Okay, so reflecting back, growing up in the industry, having grandparents that owned restaurants, and I know you had a grandparent that was also a butcher. Any key elements, any key influences, anything that has really resonated with you that sticks with you to this day?
I think when your grandparents are 90 years old and they still get up every day to go take care of their customers, it says a hell of a lot about what was important to them and what probably not knowing at the time, but is something that I've taken a part of how we are. They still get up every day and go take care of those guests.
Still to this day, they're still kicking with their restaurant to this day.
Still run and operate that bar. It just blows my mind.
So let's pull back to knowing who they are, knowing what matters to them. What are the biggest lessons they taught you?
I think my grandmother, it was just about hard work. I remember them not taking enough vacations and not doing the fun stuff because they were so focused on making sure that their regulars had a place to go. Now, do I agree with that now? Maybe not. I think that the industry's changed, and finding a hobby and preserving your own mental health is incredibly important. But I just think being around that and knowing that was important to them, it certainly had an impact on the way that I approach the restaurant industry.
So paint the picture of what hard work is, because I feel like that's a relative statement. What's hard work for me might be a different story for you. So give me an example of something that you witnessed your grandmother do that just was holy shit.
Well,
she gets it.
I think it's more about the sacrifice. I think that's a great question because I was actually just talking to my director of culinary operations yesterday about it's not hard for me to do this job. I'm mentally built for it. I'm physically built for it. I've watched my grandmother and my grandfather into their 90s do it. So
that's incredible.
I don't have excuses about being tired. I mean, And so, but that's easy for me. And in today's world, it's changed. And a lot of people, they only want to work 40 or 50 hours, and that's a full deal for them. And it's been an interesting way to adapt for me, to try to learn how to be more patient, because I wasn't raised that way, and I certainly didn't have that mentality. And I still don't. I mean, I still work 6 days a week, most weeks, because that's just how I'm personally built. So to kind of answer the question, like, what does hard work mean for me? I think hard work is having the dedication and the sacrifice to push through when you don't want to.
The dedication and the sacrifice to push through even when you don't want to. Give me an example of something you sacrificed to really set in stone that level of commitment.
Well, I think it's very similar to what you were saying, is like hard work's different for everybody. So I think the word sacrifice is very different for people. But, for me, I know that, I have 3 children now. And so, I have to constantly make decisions on what's more important, a $10,000 catering or my daughter's dance recital. And is it the right decision or the wrong decision, or does it matter? And, that's real sacrifice when you're looking your children in the eye and you're putting your business before them and they don't understand. And then other times I'll do the opposite. I'll say, screw it. My team can handle the catering, and I'm going to go be a dad, because 15 years from now, that's going to be more important than a catering that nobody's going to remember.
Yeah, and what you're going through right now is why I think we should all, even as small business owners, treat our small businesses like big businesses, so we can take a night off.
Right.
And if the business is dependent on us, then we cannot do those things, right?
Absolutely.
And listening to you talk couldn't help but remind me of a recent conversation I had with Howard B. Haar, who was the president of Starbucks when they really were scaling fast. And he just says, he's like, I don't have work-life balance. I just have my life's work.
Right.
And I feel like that same thing coming from you. So what is your life's work? Like, if you could distill that.
I know that at the point where I'm at now, and probably since my children have been born, and it's not said often enough, that I really don't care if our restaurant has an off night if I'm at home with my kids. Like, it's far more important to be a great dad to me than it is to be a great chef or to be known as a great restaurateur.
Did you always feel this way?
Absolutely not. I mean, in my early 20s, I opened the lodge when I was 24 years old, and I was a maniac, coming from San Francisco and coming to San Antonio and having the ego the size of Texas, and, really trying to push the forefront of what we wanted fine dining to be for this particular market. We had an amazing kitchen, but it was a very intense kitchen. And, I can just remember one day waking up and being like, this is stupid. Like, why am I so angry? Why am I so intense? Like, we're not enjoying the process. And then, a few years later, having children certainly changes that significantly.
What's it all worth if you can't enjoy it?
Absolutely.
Right? And why do we work? Like, we forget that at the end, it's the end.
Yeah.
Right. So you might as well enjoy the journey. Right. That's what I'm picking up from you.
Yeah. And I think it's becoming more regular for chefs to realize that.
I think people are communicating it more than ever. I think it's because the industry is opening up. We're saying, why are we competing against each other? Why are we trying to outwork each other? We're all suffering as a result. Why don't we just say, why don't we collectively come to an agreement that it's okay to work only 60 hours or 55 hours, right?
It's the double-edged sword, right? It's like, it is your livelihood, and you do got to do, it's a business, and you do have to make money, and then at the end of that you have to make a profit. And I hate to see a market where I was talking to a chef friend of mine just a couple weeks ago, and he's like, why can't we all just come to an agreement that we have 15 dishes on our menu and that's it? Right. The agreement is all chefs 15 dishes done. And so that way you don't get in that situation where one chef's doing 28 dishes, and in a way it makes it look like you're not doing the same amount as maybe the other chef. And I don't know if it means shit or not, but it's an interesting point. Yeah. It's an interesting start of conversation. But at the end of the day, too, I think chefs in history have had the tendency to do shit to impress other chefs. Ego. And that's it. And it's, you're only trying to impress your other chefs, and you're not really doing it for any other reason. And so, and to be quite frank, none of the other chefs give two shits. And so it's been kind of an interesting dynamic looking at that, and as an older, wiser man now, maybe of looking back on that.
But this is the whole point of Restaurant Unstoppable, to let people who are getting into the industry know now that there's a better way.
Right, absolutely.
And thank you for getting into that. So bringing it back to your story, we're only just talking about your we haven't really dove into your story yet. We're just reflecting on the lessons you've learned from witnessing your grandparents do this and learning it the hard way yourself. But you knew at a young age that you wanted to be in this industry. At what point were you committed to that?
I got my first real job out of high school. I mean, my first job was in a grocery store, which didn't really count, I guess, bagging groceries. But my first job out of high school was at a restaurant called CJ's Clubhouse Grill in Coppell, Texas, a little suburb of Dallas. And I was a server, walked in the door, had never done it before, but it was natural. And they were running a contest that the server with the highest sales for the whole month would win a trip for two, all expenses paid, to wherever, Cancun or something.
Okay.
It's probably 18 years old.
That sounds amazing.
And I grew up playing sports and a pretty competitive guy. And I was like, man, this is a free trip, and all I got to do is do my job. And so I was hooked. And I was hooked because I was winning a free trip, but I also just had a passion for it. And I liked it. I liked the interaction. I grew up around people that cooked, and it was a kitchen. It wasn't a fast food place. And so I pretty much knew right then and there that I loved it, but I didn't know that was a career. Went to Texas Tech out of high school after I stayed home the first semester and moved to Tech the second semester of my freshman year, and was in PR and marketing. And I thought I was going to be I thought I was going to be in advertising or public relations, and quite frankly, I didn't even know what the fuck that meant. But it sounded cool, and I thought the girls would like it.
What year is this when you're out of college
95.
or out of high school?
Yeah, 95.
Okay.
And the second day I got to Texas Tech, I met who's now my wife. We've been married almost 24 years. In 2 weeks will be 24 years.
Damn, congratulations.
Met her on the second day I was there, and I just wasn't really all that interested in the classes I was taking. I went and saw a counselor, and they were like, "What do you like to do?" I'm like, "Well, I work in restaurants." So they're like, "Well, we have a RIM program, a restaurant degree." And I was like, I didn't even know I didn't look at it as a career at that point in time, which was interesting because I loved it, but I didn't think of it as a college career.
Yeah.
And I went over there and met a guy named Ben Go, and who was the I guess the counselor or the dean of that section. And he was like, "Yeah, here's your schedule for the next 3.5 years. You're done." He just kind of walked me through what my career was going to be. And I was about a year out from finishing. I worked real hard. I mean, I ended up getting a really great job. I was a full-time salaried manager at Joe's Crab Shack while I was at Texas Tech. At the time owned by Landry's. I think they're back with Landry's now. But I was fortunate that, again, the hard work never bothered me. So my last 3 semesters, I took 18, 19, and 20 hours, those 3 consecutive semesters as far as hours in college, and I was a full-time salaried manager at a $3.5 million a year restaurant, running a crew of 65 people. So
Jesus.
But I was laying in bed one night with my wife, and we got married when we were 20. So it's a long time ago, and I would never let my 20-year-old daughter get married now. I don't know what our parents were thinking.
You got lucky, man. It's not everybody gets to find the right one so early in life. But.
Yeah, I was incredibly lucky. But we were laying down, and I was always cooking for friends. I mean, that's what I did. I would just cook for fun. And
I'm loving what you're giving us. I'm going to help you out a little more.
I remember, like, my famous dish that my friends loved. I made, like, a creamy pico de gallo sauce over steaks, and we just thought it was the greatest thing ever. But we were laying in bed watching TV, and we were flipping through, and it was the Jay Leno show. And there was a chef that came on, Emeril Lagasse. And this was like right at probably the beginning phases of Emeril being Emeril. And he did a dish called Turbo Dog Chicken. And I'd never seen him before, never heard of him, never even really knew, to be quite frank, I probably didn't even really know what chefs really did, and on that level of being a formally trained chef. And I remember just jotting down that recipe the next day, went and got all the ingredients, wanted to make this dish, which was basically fried chicken fingers and like a Creole cream sauce.
Okay.
But it changed my perspective on what I wanted to do. And I said, listen, I've always said, I'm in the RIM program. I'm going to be in restaurants.
Yeah.
And I want to open my own restaurant one day. And I said, well, if I'm going to open my own restaurant one day, I love to cook. I do it all the time. I've been around it my whole life. I need to be a chef. And that way I have because I was always front of house. So I knew front of house. That was easy. That was nothing. And so by learning how to go to, so I started researching culinary schools. And I didn't want to go to the East Coast. I don't know why. I just, for whatever reason, I was like, I don't want to go to the East Coast. Just probably because I was a little uneducated. And I thought the West Coast seemed cooler and more hippie-like. And went and visited the California Culinary Academy in San Francisco. And 2 days after my wife and I graduated from Texas Tech, we got in a U-Haul and drove to San Francisco.
I love this. So I want to pull back a couple layers on that. First, starting with Landry's. I mean, we can't overlook that incredible restaurant group here in Texas. It's been around forever. Staple in Texas communities. What were the biggest things that you learned from that group as far as operations? And
it taught me so much. I mean, it was critical to my success. It really was critical. I was a front of house manager, but really I probably was more acting as, at a minimum, I was the assistant general manager and probably was more the general manager. My general manager wasn't all that great, and saw how passionate I was and kind of just let me take the bull by the horns per se. So it taught me so much about inventory, about reporting, about HR, about all the things that, quite frankly, 19 and 20-year-old kids just don't learn. And I was just submerged in it, and it was intense, and it was a busy restaurant. I mean, in Lubbock, Texas at the time, it was the hottest place in town. I mean, $3.5 million a year on the loop of 1604, or whatever their loop was called at the time, 360. It was an incredibly valuable learning experience that I certainly would not be who I am today without that experience. And also because my boss was so critical, not in a good way, like not in a good work environment way.
So like standards critical.
Yeah, like but also just like hazing, and I was so young that I tolerated it. Like the money was so good to be. I mean, I was a salaried manager running a crew of 65 people. Like I could not afford the job, if that makes sense. But if he came in and a light bulb was out, would just lose his shit, and call me at 7 a.m. on Sunday and be like, what are you doing? This light bulb's out, Well, we had 5,000 Christmas lights hung in the restaurant. Of course they're going to go out, And, but it also taught me how I would not treat my staff. And I still carry that with me today. Now, it did teach me to be very critical in a sense of, I try to teach the thing he taught me that was valuable was you walk in the restaurant the same way every day. You have a routine. You walk the same path, and then that way you can see everything, and you see things that other people just simply don't see. And so we try to teach our staff to do that.
So he taught you how not to do it. So in that
he taught me how not to treat people.
Exactly.
Right.
Thank you for correcting me. What I was going to ask, how would you do it today, knowing what you know, evolving in the way you have evolved in that same scenario? How would you have done it?
In what sense? If I was in his shoes?
If you're in his shoes, if you found a light bulb out in your restaurant today, what would be your approach to correcting that behavior?
I think it's more just simple one-on-ones when you come back to work. I mean, was it critical for me to get out of bed to come up to change a light bulb just to prove a point? No, because all that ended up happening is me losing respect for him.
Yeah.
It got so bad that I literally went to his house one night and said, I'm done if you don't fucking change.
What happened from that point?
He had basically a breakdown at the thought that I was going to leave and he would be exposed, that everything completely changed. Damn. It just took me standing up for myself which was not easy.
Yeah.
And
so I think it's like a double-edged lessons here, right? One, three, like he did teach you standards. He did teach you that you got to care about those little things. He also taught you there's a better way to communicate that you have to care about those things. And I think the underlying lesson here is that you got to communicate when you're not feeling like you're being seen the way you want to be seen. Like,
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of power in standing up for yourself and doing it in a way that is respectful, like approaching and speaking to this person face to face. Like you could have just bashed that person behind their back. So what is your advice for somebody who's like, fuck yeah, I'm listening to this right now and I'm not being respected. I want my manager to respect the value I bring to the team. Like how do you approach somebody in a way that won't get you fired, but in fact make your relationship stronger?
You have to be willing to lose it all, and that's the hardest hurdle to get over. And that's probably why most people do keep their mouth shut and they don't stand up for themselves, because you're afraid of the repercussions. But what I learned is that by finally mustering up that confidence and having that conversation, that he was forced to realize how much power I really did have. And so my advice would be, you have to be willing to walk away, but you're going to be okay. And a lot of times, most of the time, it's kind of like the schoolyard bully. They just pick on you, and the first time you bop them in their nose, they have the tendency to take a step back and maybe rethink the repercussions themselves. So it really taught me, more than anything, it taught me to treat your people with respect and dignity, because that goes so much farther. And for me in my business model, culture is everything. Without the culture, I've got employees that have been with me all 18 years. I've got 15-year employee, I got 13-year employee, I got
that's a statement right
I have a lot of double-digit employees and a lot of 6, 7, 8, 9-year employees, and so that's something we're incredibly proud of. But I don't think I would have gotten that philosophy without the situation that I was in. So there was definitely a silver lining in being treated like shit for 2 years.
Yeah, Chef Jason, I'm loving this, man. I feel like I could hover here for like another half hour and just pull back layers, but there's so much more to your story. So moving forward, you mentioned Emma Lagasse in this moment had like a tipping point reaction on you, or effect on you. What was it exactly that made you tip? What pivoted inside of you in that moment to make you all of a sudden want to pursue this like culinary world? I
think it was his energy. This was at the peak of, bam, and look at me, this is fun, and it's like, holy shit, like I love to cook, and I'm kind of outgoing, and that looks amazing. And I never connected the dots. I always looked at having a dream, quote in parentheses dream, as a 18 or 19-year-old kid, of saying, oh, I want to open my own restaurant. I didn't know that chefing was the way to go, because at the time it really wasn't. And I always, I've always said that Emerald was the one that made our industry cool. And made it
gave the role respect.
Gave it respect, and empowered chefs to do better and to be treated better, and have more creativity and do all those things that for many years it probably was not that way. Yeah. And just the power of enthusiasm, too. In that moment, your enthusiasm, your energy has such an impact on people. And when you brought that up, I was thinking of Johnny Caraba, another Texas restaurateur over in Houston. And he said it's like you have to be so mindful of the energy. Whenever you walk through that front door, it's all about who's the most enthusiastic. Right. Or whatever energy is going into the room, whichever, like it could be negative energy or positive energy, but whichever direction it's greater, that's going to win. And you have to be mindful of that, and you can sway people with enthusiasm and positivity. Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's I was very intense coming back. I mean, the kitchens I worked in San Francisco were very intense kitchens, and this was back before anybody gave two shits about the way you treated line cooks. You were a line cook. You didn't like it? Get the fuck out, because there's 15 line cooks standing at the back door that wish they were working in here today. And so I was also brought up in that environment, and you get working for who I worked for at Joe's Crab Shack, I had a pretty thick skin going into San Francisco, and and I didn't know shit about cooking. I knew nothing, but I knew how to get a job because I knew how to interview. I knew how to sell myself. I could also say, listen, I have a college degree. I'm not some chump off the street. Like I'm literally taking 5 steps back because I want to learn this.
Yeah.
And
Oh my God, you're dropping gold, dude! Like, there's so many things I want to pull back a layer on. One, knowing how to sell yourself.
Yeah.
I know I would love to pull back a layer on that. And the other thing is being willing to take 5 steps back so you can take leaps and bounds forward later on. I don't think people realize that sometimes you got to slow down to speed up.
Right.
You got to sacrifice to get a better opportunity where there's more of a ceiling for you, right? So real quick, how do you sell yourself? Like, what advice do you have for somebody who's going on a job interview? Like, how do you sell yourself?
It's about knowing it's about knowing what they want to hear. There's a science to that, I guess.
Knowing what the person interviewing you wants to hear.
Right. I got hired, the job in particular that I'm thinking of, I have 2 stories about San Francisco working, but the one in particular was at Stars Bar and Dining, which was a super famous restaurant. Jeremiah Tower had just left, and it was kind of going through a slight rebranding. And a new chef was coming in, and I interviewed with the chef de cuisine, and I had never really worked in a professional kitchen ever. And the whole time I was at Texas Tech, I was always front of house, high school front of house. And but I went in and said, listen, man, I have a college degree, and I'm going to do what you tell me to do. I'm not going to try to do it anybody else's way. I'm a sponge. I'll be here early. I'll stay late. I'll work off the clock. I don't care. I just want to learn. And they were like, you're hired. And I got put on the line, on the hotline, or hot apps, but it was the hotline, without ever having any kitchen experience.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 kids that I went to culinary school with that had plenty more kitchen experience started on pantry.
Yeah.
And they're like, how the fuck did you end up on the hotline and we're on pantry? I'm like, I know how to interview. I interviewed
told them what they wanted to
150 people over the last year, you know, and so, but I also meant what I said. And,
that's a big part of it. You can't just go out there and tell them what
Right.
they want to hear and not deliver. You got to back it up.
And you got to know, but you also got to know what, I was always the first cook in the door. There, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like that, oh, you're going to outwork me? I'm like, you're not going to outwork me. But I also feel that way today. Mm-hmm. You can't outwork me. That's just ingrained in my head. That's my grandma getting up every day and going, like, you're not going to outwork me. I'll be there before you. I'll stay later than you if that's what it takes. But
if you're listening to this, Grandma, thanks for making an example.
I told her, I was like, Grandma, if I'm doing what you're doing now, when I'm 90, I was like, I'm going to pull you back out of that grave and smack you around because it's insane to be doing that.
This is impossible standard, Grandma.
But at the other flip side of that, that's what motivates her, and that's what she loves. And
it's your life's work, right?
So much in my family want her to stop or quit, and I'm like, absolutely not. Like, that's what she lives for. She loves those people at the bar. Like, that's what she loves.
You know what's funny that you say that, because Howard Bihar, bringing it back to him, my life's work, when he retired, he's like, what's life all about?
Yeah.
It's like, and then it clicked for him. He's like, my life's work is about serving others and bettering others. So he was able to get it beyond it because he could continue his life work. His life's work isn't defined by the restaurant, right? And that was a big lesson. So, okay, man, I'm loving this conversation, but there's still so much to your story. Moving into the trip out west to California, is it worth hovering over your culinary? The actual culinary experience as far as your education, or does it make more sense to talk about the restaurant tours you're working for while you're in college?
I think there's a lot to be taken away from. I think it's pretty unique that I went to college first and got a 4-year degree and then went to culinary school, because I think typically people do one or the other.
Mm-hmm. I was curious about that because you studied restaurant and hotel management in college, and then you went to culinary school.
Right.
You like double dip there.
Yeah, so it's like I got my bachelor's in restaurant hotel management, which was it taught me a lot. I mean, it did. It taught me the analytical side. It taught me the finance side, even though I'm still maybe not very good at that. But
some things we're just not naturally good at.
Right. But then going to culinary school, it taught me the basis of cooking. And I think that's the big argument in today's culinary world is like, well, do you need to go to culinary school? Depends. What do you want?
That was my next question, because you doubled down, whereas today I would say, I lean towards the favor of like, go work.
Right.
And if you feel like you still need it after spending some time, then sorry to cut you short.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know the right answer. I mean, Bourdain obviously was very famous for saying, don't go to culinary school, spend 2 years traveling, and that's a fine plan. There is no right or wrong answer. I mean,
there's one way.
There's some of my best chefs or cooks I've ever had never went to culinary school and could outcook any kid that spent 2 years doing it. So it's what's your sacrifice? What are you willing to put into it? How much are you willing to read? But I do think that what I realized, and you kind of brought it up earlier, is about taking 5 steps back. Is I realized my very first job in San Francisco was at Jardiniere, super famous French restaurant, Tracy Desjardins. I was going to school in the afternoon, so I was looking for a morning job. And I kind of the same thing. I went in, I was like, hey, I'm looking for a morning job. And they were like, we have a prep cook job. Again, I'd never worked. It was my first professional kitchen ever. And I didn't even know shit about any of the chefs. I didn't know that I walked into one of the most famous restaurants in San Francisco. I had no thing to base that off of.
Yeah. Ignorance can be bliss, right? Because maybe you wouldn't have walked into that door if you had.
I didn't last long.
Okay.
I didn't last long. I didn't last long for a couple reasons.
Okay.
Mostly because I was like, I was a bottom of the barrel entry prep cook. So it would be taking 2 cases of arugula leaves and picking the stem off of every leaf, which would take 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And, I just remember being like, holy shit, I have a college degree. What am I doing? Holy shit, I have a college degree. What am I doing? And then there was a pastry chef there. And I would love to know who it was just because I would love to see what he does now. But I was in charge of straining the chicken stock. Well, being a perfectionist, I would go back there every day and like skim it and skim it and skim it and skim it. Well, that was kind of his back area, was the pastry chef. Again, not knowing anything about the political landscape of a kitchen because it's my first job. One day he's just like, what the fuck are you doing? What are you fucking doing? Let the fucking stock go and come back in an hour and skim it all at once. Like, and to me, I thought I was doing something great. Like, I was like, man, my fucking stock looks good. I'm skimming it. It looks good. And to him, he's like, what he was trying to say is like, what are you fucking doing? You're wasting your time.
Yeah.
And you're pissing me off and you're in my way. And it was a good eye-opener in a way. Like, I thought it was crazy, and I was like, God, what a prick. But I just remember being like, oh, okay, like, I don't have to take this all the way back to square one. I don't need to learn how to pick stems off of lettuce. And so the following weekend, I requested off because my wife's family was coming to town. And I said, listen, when I got hired, I said, listen, this is the only 2 days I'm going to ask off. I will never ask off for 2 days. And, of course, a day before, they're like, hey, we need you to come in tomorrow. I was like, listen, I told you when I got hired. And, again, you have to remember, I ran a restaurant of 165 front of house employees. I have a college degree. I'm like, listen, I was very upfront with you. I said, those are only 2 days I need off. I was like, I'm not coming in. It's the one and only time in my life I just no-showed. I was like, I'm done. Like, because they weren't respecting me, and I had come off of this job where my boss didn't respect me enough, and I was like, you know what, fuck it, this isn't the place for me, and I never looked back.
Well, you ended up at Stars, so it's not like complete.
Right, absolutely. And then I ended up at Stars in
Yeah.
a great situation, and I spent almost probably 18 full months there, if not 20 months there, in the greatest learning kitchen ever, with people that really allowed me to learn.
Yeah.
And wanted to teach us.
Yeah, so distill real quick the big lesson from that story, the slowing down to speed up, or you can make anything from you can take anything out of a bad situation. Like what was the big message for you?
I think the big message for me is find a place that wants you, that you want to be, where you can learn what you want to learn.
Okay.
For young chefs, you got to find places where you can learn what you want to learn.
Got you.
And we talk about this all the time. It's a philosophical question in today's marketplace, in a world where it's frowned upon to ask people to work for free. And it's a delicate argument. I can understand the privilege argument behind it, that I can't afford. But when you work a job, it's 8 hours a day, or more or less. You're going to get out of that job what that restaurant needs you to get out of it for 8 hours. Mm-hmm. If you want quick, or make it a quicker learning experience, invest in yourself. And not enough young chefs in today's world invest in themselves.
What's the best way for a young chef to invest in themselves?
Well, in today's world, it's video. I mean, everything you've ever wanted to learn or see is out there. Every dish that's ever been made is out there. Do you watch it? Do you pay attention? Are you I preach all the time about learning via osmosis. Like, I can't stand when a line cook works on pantry for 4 months and begs to get on the hotline, and they get on the hotline and they don't have any fucking clue what to do. I'm like, how do you not know what to do? You've been standing on this station wishing you were on that station, and you don't know how much
pick up anything.
You don't know how much goes into that. You didn't pay attention to how much parsley goes into it at the last second. Like, you can learn anything you want today in cooking via the internet.
Yeah.
And you can learn in restaurants by just watching.
Paying attention.
Just paying attention and saying, break it down to what they're doing. How long did they put the saute pan on? How hot is the pan? How much oil did they put in it? Where did they put the fish? Did they season it this side up or this side up? How much pepper? You can do that just by watching.
Just awareness. Being self-aware and mindful of the situation you're in, and making it the most of every moment.
It's a critical failure of chefs. And it creates a lot of burnout because they get frustrated. But their frustration really, if they were to have some self-awareness, would be it's their fault. Yeah,
and you mentioned something else I think is worth putting emphasis on, that we live in a time right now where we've never been so fortunate, where we can literally learn from the best. Look at master chefs. You got Thomas Keller teaching what he knows. You got, there's infinite people, but you get the idea. Like, you can literally get influenced by the best in the world. And you got podcasts like Restaurant Unstoppable, where maybe they're not teaching you how to cook, but they're teaching you what their values are and their philosophies are and their perspective, and like that's just as valuable in my opinion.
It's more valuable,
right? Thank you.
It's knowledge is power is not a cliche. It's understanding and listening to the real things that matter, the real things that make a restaurant successful and not successful, and how tasty your seared fish is the least important thing of how successful your restaurant's going to be.
Yes, dude, I'm loving this. Sometimes I get some a little bit of a hard rap spending so much time in the early years, but I feel like that's when we're formed, and I think these lessons are the ones that influence us throughout the rest of life.
Right.
Is there any other experience that's worth hovering over? Any other restaurant experience or person in general that influenced you into the person you are today before you came back to Texas in 2001, 2000?
I think the restaurant Stars was very formative. I had two sous chefs that were young. I didn't know how young. I didn't know how young they were now until I look back now. And I still communicate with one in particular quite a bit on social media. But my chef there, Christopher Fernandez. I loved the way he cooked. I loved his food. I loved his style of cooking, and it really formed the way that I cook today. And then when I went to Napa, I worked for a chef, David Frakes. And David was amazing because and I still try to do this today, probably not as much now as I did for the first 10, 12 years of my career. But he said, hey, man, bring me a list of 15 things you want to learn how to do. And I'll order it. And you can fuck around with it. And if it works, we'll put it on, we'll serve it. And I thought that was amazing.
What was he doing in that moment?
He was the chef of Behringer Vineyards, and he was, cooked very progressive. He trained under Gary Danko, which was, for me, like, powerful.
I don't know if I communicated that well enough. What was he doing by giving you the opportunity to give you this list? Like, what was the value in that for both of you? Not just you, but both of you.
I think he was giving me the opportunity to say, in culinary school, it's not like they teach you how to cook foie gras, and I was like, I've always wanted to learn how to cook foie. He's like, cool, I'll bring in a lobe and we'll do it together. So he was giving me an opportunity to learn the things that I wanted to learn, which made that job that much more valuable and engaging.
But what did that do for him?
I think it was a mentor. I think he was doing it because he knew that I was a young, ambitious chef that wanted to learn as much as possible, and I think maybe he saw a little bit of himself in me.
Yeah, and I think in that moment he showed you he cared enough to give you, to open that door, right? And when what's the saying? Nobody cares how much you know. They only want to know how much you care. Right. And these little things that you do that you can show people that I care will make you show up I mean, you were already showing up with your best version of yourself, but now, like, what level of where did he? How many more pegs did he go up in your book when you opened that doorway for you?
He was an amazing mentor, and the food was amazing. Now listen, it was also a corporate business. It was a no food cost situation. We made our veal stock from veal breast, if that gives any perspective. So it was a very unique kitchen, but we were able to order whatever we want, however we want. But we also cooked really true California food. It was the freshest. It was the freshest produce every single day. I mean, just the gardens we had on property, and I still use I think I use a lot of what I learned from him in today's world.
Mm-hmm. What was the biggest thing you learned working in Jeremiah Towers restaurant? For a little background, if you guys aren't familiar with that name, he came up under, oh my God, of course.
Alice Waters.
Yes, Alice Waters, Chapini. Yeah.
Yep.
That's what, yeah. So, I mean, he comes from himself, great lineage. So any big impression he made on you on how to be, not necessarily what to do, but how to be?
He had left right before I got there, so it was more of us trying to get out from underneath his shadow.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a lesson there. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, we just cooked our food, and it wasn't about being pretentious, and it wasn't about caviar and champagne. It was about, again, fresh ingredients, and I mean, one of the most transformative dishes of my life was just, we got fresh porcinis, and I'd never even seen them, and we just grilled them with a little bit of salt, olive oil, and a piece of garlic toast with like shaved Parmesan, and it was like still one of the greatest things I've ever had in my entire life, and it was a transformative dish in a sense of like being mind blown at that age as a young cook, and it was something that would never be on a Jeremiah Tower menu.
Got you. So when did this feeling inside of you start to bubble back up? When did you know you had enough time in California to come back to Texas and start? Were you visioning your own concept? It sounds like you always knew you wanted to open your own place.
Again, it was always like, we're going to open our own restaurant one day. What did that really mean? I don't know. I mean, the way that at that time in our life, so many different things could have happened that could have taken us in a lot of different ways. My wife worked out of college. She was a mathematics major, but she got a job with a .com when we moved to San Francisco. And it was the .com bust, the big famous just crash and burn. And we looked at each other and we're like, we better get the fuck out of here because we're not going to be living on a line cook salary. And so,
on the West Coast.
And so in San Francisco,
exactly.
And so we made just a conscious decision to say, all right, we're going to move back to Texas. And we moved back to Dallas, which is where I was from. And I got a job. I left the kitchen. The piece that I was missing was kind of the financial side. So I'd done front of house management, and then San Francisco quote unquote learning how to cook. And then I needed to know how to do like big time finances for restaurants. And I took a job with a restaurant group out of Fort Worth called Riata as the assistant general manager, which was basically their financial manager. And we moved back to Dallas and hated it and just were like.
So what year was it when you moved back to Dallas?
2000.
So you didn't spend too much time with this restaurant group because you opened your first restaurant in 2001.
Yeah, I was there maybe 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
they were in top of the bank. It's a long story, but they were on top of the Bank One building. It got hit by a tornado. It was a big famous story. And it basically, they were the only business that reopened in the bank, and then it ended up, the building was like condemned and shut down and tore down.
Okay. So I love this. Something I'm picking up from your story is this level of intentionality, right? Like,
absolutely.
I'm going to learn about the operations. Well, if I'm going to own my own restaurant, I need to know a little bit about the food. And then you went and you learned about the food. You learned a lot about the food. And now you're like, well, I still recognize that I know my weakness, which is financials and numbers, but I don't necessarily need to be good at it. I need to understand it at the very least. And it sounds like you just wanted to understand it.
Yeah, I just looked at, I always said I had a puzzle, and that was the last piece of the puzzle that I was missing. And so I always looked at my career at that point in time as a puzzle of putting that puzzle together. And if there's a piece that's missing, you keep shifting and turning it and flipping it around until you find it, and then you put it into place. Yeah. And so once we moved to my wife's family had moved, my wife's parents had moved to San Antonio, and we came to visit.
Before we get into that, real quick.
Yeah.
What did you learn about financials that this opportunity allotted you that you wouldn't have otherwise learned if you didn't take that extra time to dive in?
I think I've learned more later in it than I did at the time. I didn't really see anything in particular that was blowing my mind. You
Okay.
know, if I were to look back and say, what did I learn? That they counted every single penny down to the nitty gritty. And when I worked there, I hated it. I thought it was ridiculous, you know, to be like literally, you know, once a week, they would count every piece of silverware. That's how they were owned by, or one of the partners was an accountant. And so it was a very penny pinched business model.
I mean, we learned from David Scott Peters the significance of menu engineering and knowing exactly what down to the penny every item on that menu is, including the menu. But now you're saying including the menu itself, right? Every element that goes into the experience you need to count to track.
You don't have to.
But what happens when you do?
Well, you have a better chance of survival.
Yes.
You have a better chance of success when you pay attention. And that's what happens with 99.9% of chefs that are unsuccessful in their ventures, whenever that may be in their career, is they don't care about how much things cost.
Mm-hmm.
They care about the way it looks, and they care about what the menu says. But, you know, it's incredibly important to understand the finances.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Any other lessons there before moving on?
No, not from Riyadh. I mean, it was, well, I would, let me take that back. The other thing that drove me crazy is that we would be, at the time it drove me crazy, is that they only emailed you. And so you'd be sitting in a room with 5 managers, and the manager 2 seats over would send you an email. And you'd literally be like, hey, I'm fucking right here. Just ask me the question.
So what's the lesson? How did that leave an
accountability?
Impact? Okay.
It's a trail. No, I asked you to do that, and you haven't done it. So it held people more. And
no,
again,
he said, she said. There's a paper
and that's something I learned, and I didn't get it at the time. I get it now as, you know, the owner of 6 restaurants and, you know, 25 plus management team. It's like, you know, hey, did you email it? No, I just told them. Okay, well, if you emailed it, then you could say, well, I asked you to do this on Friday at 3:00. You said no problem. Now it's Monday and it's not done. Yeah.
I mean, I think the equivalent to email today, I mean, email is still a very powerful tool, but Slack, right? You're using tools like that, for example. You were just talking about how you were moving to San Antonio. I think you mentioned your wife's family moved out to San Antonio, and that's kind of what brought you out this way?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we came to visit, and we're like, wow, this is a cool little town. And, you know, we had moved back from San Francisco. We thought we wanted to open our own restaurant, although we literally had no idea what that meant. My father-in-law was committed to helping us get started on some level, and he started looking at locations in San Antonio. And we decided just to move down here. We weren't happy in Dallas. The restaurant was closing. My wife didn't really like her job, and we said, you know what? Let's move down there. Your family's there. But really, more than anything, we realized it was the best city with the best opportunity. Austin was going through its version of a .com bust at the same time. Houston and Dallas would have eaten us alive. And we came and visited and just kind of loved the vibe and realized, you know, there's not a lot of competition here for what we want to do. In a sense that chef-driven, kind of modern American, fine dining, you know, it was Bruce Auden at Biga. It was Andrew Weissman at Le Rev. It was Mark Bliss at Silo. And that was it. And they were all kind of on this side of town, this kind of downtown area. And so for us, we were like, man, this is a huge city. And we ended up finding the location where in Castle Hills where the lodge ended up being.
Yeah, and I want to just like pull a layer back on that because I feel like, and I see it happen time and time again in all my interviews. Like you go to the big cities, you go to the cities like the San Franciscos, the New Yorks, the LAs, or wherever, and you surround yourself with the greatest. You take that level of execution, that knowledge, and you go to a city. In 2001, it was San Antonio. San Antonio has since come up. It's a great culinary city, but there's so many small smaller cities right now. And I feel like with the direction the world's going and more people working remotely, there's so much opportunities in these small towns. Yeah. So you don't have to go to the big cities to open a restaurant to be successful. You're actually more likely to be successful where it hasn't quite gotten there yet, and being the first of the scene. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, absolutely. I think what we realized is like, hey, if we're successful, will be deep roots.
Yeah.
We will build our family here. We'll raise our family here. We're getting in at the ground level. Yeah. We looked at that as a great asset for the city. And quite frankly, we're not that opportunity still exists in San Antonio, which I think is its real beauty.
That's cool. So you open your first restaurant. Take us through that process of selecting the location. I know you've opened a lot of restaurants prior to this, going to people who were opening restaurants. So you got a lot of opening restaurant experiences.
Yeah, in fact, I had Joe's Crab Shack in Lubbock, I opened.
Yep.
Stars Bar and Dining, I opened. I had opened, I think, 3 restaurants prior to opening my own, and so I knew what it took. I knew the nuance. I knew how to get in there and get nitty-gritty and put in elbow grease, and so it certainly made that a lot easier. But we had moved down here to write a business plan and then pitched it to some banks, got a small business loan, and the lodge, my father-in-law just was driving around town, saw it was an old house. It was an old house in the middle of Castle Hills. The city of Castle Hills is named after the house. It sits on 2.5 acres. And we said, you know what, this could be a pretty cool restaurant in an old house. It was a son of a bitch to maintain. We were there for almost 12 years, I think 11 and some change. And a lot of construction, a lot of, real quick we learned, and we opened 1 month after September 11th. And so when you're doing all this planning and all this organization, and then all of a sudden such a, tragic thing happens, and then we opened October 16th, 2001. Had a nice little start to it. Nobody knew I was 24 years old.
Yeah. And that blows my mind, by the way. Like, opening a restaurant younger than the age of 25, like the pressure of that just blows my mind.
Well, and it was also completely unexpected. I literally would go talk to guests, and they literally thought I was bullshitting them that I was the chef. It's just, I can't tell you the thousands and thousands of times I heard in my career, "You're the chef?" I'm like, yeah. And so, and then that first July, there was a big flood here in San Antonio, big monster flood. And we lost like the first 2.5 weeks of July. And that right out of the gate just crushed us for months. And it just shows how fragile the restaurant industry. But if I were to say, like, looking back, I feel like that's why we've been able to kind of navigate this kind of COVID experience, is because we're there. We've been through that. We have grinded it out. Like, it wasn't it just took us back 18 years to be like, all right, like, pull up your bootstraps and get down and go. And
what was the opening quote?
You make it happen and finish strong.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of it, is we had no choice. We were 24 years old, and my brother was 22. My wife and I were 24. My brother was 22, and we were like, failure, it just simply is not an option. And there were a lot of days where it was just me and my brother in the kitchen, and maybe my wife and 2 servers, and that was the shift. And so
I feel like opening a restaurant in 2001 isn't quite the same today, but I feel like a lot of it is the same. Like, for example, financing isn't probably quite the same, right? But how did you get the money? Because, you're young. You didn't have money put away, I'm assuming.
No, my father-in-law was kind of a silent partner and helped give us just enough money to put a down payment on our small business loan.
Okay.
So I think we had $125,000 that we put down and borrowed $400 or $450.
Okay.
Somewhere in that range. And so we did everything for, I think, $600,000.
Okay. So any advice on how to navigate going into business with family? Because you said silent partner. Was there an operations agreement? Does it get weird with family and operations agreements?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny because people look at me and my wife and my brother now, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you guys all get along so well." I'm like, yeah, like, we've been down every battle. We've screamed and yelled and not spoken and every part. So how do you go into business with family you got to just be very careful. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. In a sense, you have to be willing to lose it all, because it can get ugly, and it's not always fun, and it isn't always pretty. But if you can bond together and work together and set egos aside, which is hard. I mean, I know what I want. And, we're fortunate now that 18 years into this venture, it's kind of, hey, there's 3 of us, My father-in-law's really never gotten, he'll throw us some ideas every once in a while, but normally he stays out and lets us kind of navigate the path. And so our rule is, hey, it's 2-1. So it's me and my brother outvoting my wife, or it's me and my wife outvoting my brother, or it's my brother and my wife outvoting me.
Well, I think that's a really important number. Like when you have partnerships, the sweet spot seems to be 3 because there's never a tie.
Right.
And I think that's really, really important. Regarding the operations agreement, did you guys like any advice on that, like navigating the actual operations agreement?
I mean, we did an LLC. We just kind of all split it up evenly.
Okay.
I mean, it's a tough question because everybody's family is so different.
Yeah.
But I would say that, we talk about that a lot of times, is like we don't have outside partners. My father-in-law helped us get us started with the first one. He bailed us out on an experiment that we did on a restaurant that closed to kind of help get us through kind of a rough time. But other than that, he's never really jumped in there. So I look at it a lot of times. I'm lucky that I don't have to take anybody else's opinion into the matter. And I'm always very fearful for chefs that go the investor route. But the reality of it is that's their best case 99.9% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, you really got to be mindful of that because at the end of the day, when it's somebody else's money, you got to take that into account. I mean, you were fortunate because your investor was family. It seems like it was, he was investing in you and his daughter. He just wanted to see you be successful.
Right.
And he probably didn't want anything to do with the operations.
Right.
So, I mean, it works out. Anything that, you mentioned, just to kind of bring it back to the surface, you opened 3 other restaurants before this. And I think it's really important that if you want to open a restaurant and you have 30 or 40 years of experience working in a restaurant even, opening a restaurant is an entirely different beast than running a restaurant. So what key lessons did you learn? I mean, you've opened. I mean, you currently have 5 or 6 locations right now as we
as we speak today, 6.
Before COVID-19.
I think we technically have 6 right now.
6. Okay, but how many restaurants have you opened in your career? Because I was honestly losing track.
It's a lot. I mean, if just from my own restaurant, for my entities, do you want me to try to go through it?
I mean, you can if you want. Just like you can do like a fast forward, like tap on each one just to get a perspective.
The Lodge, Bin 555, Bin 555 Dallas, Tre Trattoria,
where we're sitting today.
Two Brothers BBQ. It was in a different location.
Okay.
So does that count twice?
Yeah,
it does. Actually. Okay, so Tre, Two Brothers BBQ Market, Insignia. Then Insignia transformed into Tre Downtown. Umaimi, which was Bin 555's transformation. Then that didn't work, so that became Tre Inoteca. Shuck Shack. Bin Tapas Bar, which is now Alamo BBQ. And I think that's something to touch on, like to circle back around. I'll let you do that.
I'll try.
Of converting the restaurant.
Yeah, that is actually. I'm happy you're going there because it was on my radar.
And then I'm forgetting some, I think.
So I'm up to 14.
Yeah,
Let's just call it 16.
It's somewhere around. 14 was the number I had in my head prior to it, but it's somewhere in that range. Chispas, I left Chispas out. Yeah.
So I mean, I think one point is like you have a lot of, home runs, right? And I think part of being a restaurateur is understanding that not everything's gonna be a home run. Like
I feel like I'm like batting 333.
That's
like
really good.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Like if you're playing baseball, I'm okay.
Still good.
I've got an 18-year career batting 333. I'm probably not going to the Hall of Fame, but I've had a happy career. It's a good analogy.
I think you're doing well, or else I would not be here. That's for sure. So, I mean, I guess to dial back the idea of like it's one thing to know how to run a restaurant.
Yeah.
It's another thing to know how to open a restaurant.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have? I mean, reflecting back at your first restaurant being number 4, the 4th restaurant you opened, you've opened 14 restaurants since then. Knowing what you know now, if you could go back and open number 1 and 2 or 3 open again, over again, what would you have done differently knowing what you know now?
I don't know that I would have done a whole lot differently at the lodge. If anything, I would have spent a little bit more money on functionality.
What do you mean by that?
Just, we didn't renovate the kitchen all the way, but it was a financial restraint, and that's what you're always going to go into. What we feel like we have done in the last 10 years of our career is we specialize in, and I'm going to circle back around to the question, but we specialize in 2nd generation or 3rd generation spots. So we have never, now the lodge was not a restaurant. It was a house built in 1929. So it was a pain in the ass to renovate, and it was not built to be a restaurant. So, a house built in 1929 does not have that great of insulation for air conditioning and things like that. We've specialized in 2nd, 3rd generation places because that's where you save your money. And my father-in-law's famous quote, he always used to say, like, you make your money before you open the doors. Like, that's where you're going to make your profit. So it's before you sign your lease, because if you sign a bad lease, you're already losing money.
Yep.
And I've learned that lesson way too many times in my career, because you get bought into the but 2nd generation is where you make your money. You're not paying $30,000 for a brand new vent hood. That what it's going to cost you, and the Ansel system, and all X, Y, Z, the grease trap, and the every expense. So when you first asked me the question, like, what does it take to open a restaurant? Where do you start to open a restaurant? Like, to me, is like, start at your toothpick holder and go up, right? Because what happens is most people start at the top and go down, right? So you think, okay, I'm going to have the nicest range. And
dude, I'm loving this right now.
I want the top of the line steam table, or I want the greatest ventilation system. It's like, no, start at your toothpick holder and build it up.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I know what you're saying, but what do you mean by start at your toothpick holder?
Well, because there's you kind of the way you've prefaced, like, it's a lot different to run a restaurant than it is to open a restaurant. And if you don't start your toothpick holder, there's a lot of shit you forget, or you run out of money by the time you get there.
Yeah.
And what are your sugar caddies going to be? What are all the little things that you've never opened a restaurant before that you just can't possibly fathom that your expenses.
Yeah.
And then that's where you end up becoming so far over budget at the end, because and then you don't have to have everything shiny and new. I mean, like, I use sheet trays as an example all the time. You can find sheet trays at auctions for $1 a piece.
Yeah.
Or you can go buy 100 of them for $5. And by the way, after the first fucking time you pop them in a convection oven, they look exactly like the ones that are $1.
Yeah.
And nobody gives a shit at all that your sheet tray wasn't brand new. So you just spent $2,000 on something you could have spent $50 on or $100 on. That's money you're never going to get back.
Yeah. I might be crossing a line here, but I'm going to go anyway, just in case the answer is yes. Do you have a checklist that you use to make sure you're not missing anything every time you open a restaurant?
I had one that I used for years.
Okay.
But I think now we're so good.
Do you still have it?
I probably have it in a file somewhere.
Would you be willing to share it?
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
I'm so happy I went there.
It's just an Excel. It's just an Excel.
Yeah, but
like, it's just an Excel.
There's so many
program.
little things that we just don't think of, and you have so much experience. Just not, whoops, I didn't think of that. Add it to the list, right? And we can. The whole idea of the show is to compound on those to stand on the shoulders of giants. Like, we can choose to be ignorant and start from nothing, or we can learn from those who have come before us and start learning from the mistakes they made, right? Sorry, I just I had to at least take a swing at that.
No, I think it's good information, and I think I'd be happy to share it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, this idea that I kind of got totally sidetracked because I was afraid to ask that question, not going to lie, but I'm happy we did. When listening to you talk, the two phrases that came to my mind when I think of 2nd and 3rd generation is, 1, be someone's exit strategy, 2, turnkey operations. So if you can just move in and maybe you have a concept that's been like floating around the back of your mind, you're like, well, this kitchen is literally set up for exactly that. I can just move right in,
Right.
turnkey operation. The second idea with being someone's exit strategy, you make your money before you ever sign the lease. Sometimes people just want to walk away from a situation, and if you can be the light at the end of their tunnel and just let them get away from the situation,
Right.
like has that ever happened with you?
We have never taken over anything from somebody that was still in business, but we've come close.
Okay.
But I agree. I agree completely. I think your sentiment is right on. And
Got you.
you know, at the end of the day, you're running a business. You got to get out of your own way sometimes, and that's where second generation spots are so critically important for especially young chefs that don't, you know. I stress a lot of times to chefs that can save. If you could save $50,000, you could own your own restaurant if you're smart about it.
If you had $50,000 right now, how would you go about opening your own restaurant?
You immediately just get in the car and drive and look for the locations that are already built.
Twist that mic up for me a little bit. So say that one more time.
You're going to drive around town and try to find locations that are for lease.
Okay.
And then you realize that it's okay to start small and build into it, you know. And it just goes back to what we're saying. Everybody wants the bright, red, shiny new car.
Yeah.
And the second you pull that car off the lot, it's lost X amount in value.
Yeah.
You know, there's a correlation there with restaurants that, again, you don't need to spend $300 on chairs. Your guests, quite frankly, if you're not trying to be a Michelin-starred restaurant, which you're not, they don't give a fuck.
Yeah. And the truth is, like, it's good to have a vision. It's good to have an aiming point of where you want to be someday. But you also have to realize that you don't get there overnight and that it starts from where you can.
Right.
Right? And that's what I'm picking up from you. I love it. Any other lessons from the early days? I know that you, like the saying you have on your website is that, you know, you were a chef that couldn't, you know, get all of his ideas out into one restaurant, so you had to become a restaurateur. It's kind of the sentiment, right?
Is that what our PR department wrote?
Something like that. But you know what I mean? Like, the idea is, like, the question I have for you is, how do you go from being the chef of one restaurant to a restaurateur of 6 restaurants?
Everything that we have done, even till this day, is happened completely organically. We have never once said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to open a restaurant this year. The Lodge would probably be the exception, right? Your first restaurant.
Yeah.
The second location, somebody called us, said, hey, we got this location. You should come take a look at it. We were 4 years into it. We were doing well. We said, so it's always happened organically. But the second part is we've always felt that up to a certain point, I guess.
Yeah.
But I guess there's still something to be said. It's accurate. Is that we've always just tried to open restaurants that we wanted to eat at that the market didn't have, and trying to fill a void. So if you look at Bin 555, it was a small plates wine bar that we opened, I think, in 2006. There was not a small plate restaurant in San Antonio in 2006. There wasn't a wine bar focused restaurant in 2006. And we said, these are the places we would have eaten at every night in San Francisco if we still lived there. So we opened it. Then Tre Trattoria, there was not a restaurant that did fresh pasta every day on all pastas. Sure, you could find a chef doing a ravioli or maybe a tagliatelle, but there wasn't a pasta-focused restaurant that made pastas in-house every day. And really, I always tell the story that I opened that restaurant because I wanted a good linguine and clams.
Okay.
Is there ego involved in that comment? Yeah, I guess it could be looked at that way, but it was just a simple, that was my...
You couldn't find it, so you knew there was a void.
That was my truth at the time. Two Brothers Barbecue Market, we didn't feel like there was a Central Texas, or not Central Texas, more South Texas, Luling and Lockhart style barbecue place in San Antonio at the time. And so we didn't open Two Brothers Barbecue to be chefy. We wanted just a kick-ass barbecue joint. Shuck Shack, there was no lobster roll in San Antonio available every day. Andrew Weissman did one at the Sandbar, but it wasn't available every single day. So, you know, for us, it was just kind of like, what are the type of things that we like to eat? And then it would be, range is a great example. I never sought to do a steakhouse on the Riverwalk. You know, they called us, and after Luke left, and said, hey, we got this great spot. You want to come take a look at it? We looked at it. We're like, it's impressive. Okay, what's the deal look like? Okay, let's negotiate this. Let's look at it. Second generation spot.
Yep.
It's all happened organically.
So the big thing I pull from that last tear you went on, as far as a lot of people will say, you got to do what you love, or else you won't have the endurance to show up every day. And
Right.
other people say you got to give the market what it needs, because you can't just expect the people everybody else to like what you like. But what you're saying is you got to, almost like a Venn diagram, you got to overlap the two circles, and you got to find out when what I love also is what the market needs. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said about that.
Okay.
And I don't know that the way I'm doing it's the right way. I mean, it probably would be a lot smarter for me just to keep opening barbecue restaurants.
Yeah.
You know? But that's, at this point in time, that's not what our passion is. You know, I mean, we're working on a deal right now that's going to be kind of a Mediterranean vegetable kind of driven concept that we're trying to negotiate. And it's a cool space, and it's, I think, going to be a badass place. And San Antonio doesn't have that particular type of food right now on maybe the chef driven level. So it just happens organically, man. It's like I just try to roll with it.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, we always kind of like, man, is this how we're going to live our lives for the next 5 years? But and maybe that's how my grandma ended up doing it until her 90s, is that she's like, all right, well, I'm just going to do it, you know, because this is what I'm doing and I'm okay with it. So we're constantly trying to evaluate that and have some self-reflection. But at the end of the day, the snowball's going down the mountain, and we can't stop it. So we just got to kind of roll with it.
Yeah, there's three things I want to definitely talk about before we go into the speed round. The first is I want to understand what the secret to operating and scaling organically is. Secondly, I want to know, you know, there's a lot of concepts that you've had to close, but you retain the space so you can try different things. I think there's probably a few lessons there, and then I want to know what your plan is for the future. Okay. I want to make sure we cover those three things. So I'm just getting them out there so we make sure we're intentional. So what is the secret to scaling organically? And from my understanding, when you say organically, you're just letting the opportunities come to you. What is the secret to getting those opportunities to come to you?
Saying no.
Okay.
You know, it happens so many times, and listen, I've done it too many times myself, is that I fall in love with a deal, and it wasn't the right deal. It was a stupid deal, and, you know, but it's easy to fall in love with a space and then trap yourself in a bad deal. You have to have a good deal. I'm a much more fortunate restaurateur now than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You know, I mean, I signed some really stupid, shitty deals. I mean, our third restaurant that we opened was a Bin 555 concept in Dallas, and we got fucking destroyed because we signed a really, really bad deal. And then the housing crisis, you know.
What made the deal bad? I'm just curious.
Too high of rent, a really piece of shit landlord that was not there to help on any level when anything needed to be done. We let emotion take over, and it was just a bad deal.
Gotcha.
And we paid the price for that. But that also is what made us much better restaurateurs. It made us go, hey, you're not that hot shit, you know, that you
don't
think
know
you
until
are.
you know.
And but it made us smarter financially.
Yeah.
It changed the way that we purchase and those type of things. And so you just have to be able to walk away from the deal until you are 1,000% sure that it's going to be a good deal for you. And I see it all the time with my friends, and my chefs are like, oh my God, what did I do? I'm paying $9,000 a month. I'm like, man, that's a lot of money. Like, how are you going to get that? You know, that's a lot of mouths to feed. Like, every day you have to be doing X amount of covers. And, you know, people, what happened is, and I just had a conversation this week with like a financial, like not my banker, but with somebody else. And I was like, listen, they were asking me some about projections. I'm like, projections don't mean shit. Projections are numbers on a piece of paper that do not mean shit. Because what happens is your bank asks you to fill out projections. You fill out the projections, and you know what you immediately do? You buy into them. You look at them, and you're like, oh, man, if we're doing 2.5 turns every night, we're going to be doing this, and our bottom line, and after our P&L, we're going to be making $380,000 a year. I'm like, no, you're fucking not.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing 2.5 turns. You're going to do 1.5 turns, and on Mondays you're going to do 3/4 of a turn. So you have to, if people take anything away from what I say, like, do not believe projections on paper. They're just projections on paper.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess was there a lesson there, like, whatever you think you're going to do, maybe be a little bit more conservative so you exceed the expectation?
It's always the cliche to be like, oh, whatever your projections are, believe it's going to be half.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, you're lying to you're not being realistic. And it's funny because restaurants, sometimes people just catch lightning in a bottle.
Yep.
There's a lot of restaurants that are just crazy busy, and there's no real explanation for it. The food's average and the service is but sometimes you just catch lightning in a bottle, and that's an amazing thing to do. But it doesn't really, I love when people try to like relate to that, like, oh, well, look what they're doing. I'm like, yeah, don't base that off of anything, because you're setting yourself up for failure. Yeah, one of the things I love to say, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know anything. And one of the cliches, like one of the things that, like, or the examples that we always hear, like, just say yes. Like, you always got to say yes. Just like whatever opportunities, just say yes, figure it out. But at the same time, you always hear, there's another saying that I love, that everything you say yes to is something else you have to say no to. Right.
Because you can only do so much.
Yeah.
So I think it's situational. When you're young in your career and you're just looking for opportunity, like, and you can fall on your face and get back, you just say yes, like, do things. But once you start getting to a point where you have something of value, you got to be really intentional with what you choose to give your energy to. So it's kind of like, it's one of those situations where, like, it depends. But do you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, for us, like, we get pitched every deal in town, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be realistic.
Yeah.
By all the major developers, and we'll look at every deal. I'll look at every single deal, because you learn from them. You learn what is the market asking for, what are they willing to give, and blah 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 blah. But it's amazing, and I do think the industry was already starting to change. COVID is certainly going to continue to accelerate that.
We'll get into that.
That the power is going to come back to the restaurants a little bit.
I hope so.
The rent structure's got to come down for new places. I'm not talking about the quirky little small house on St. Mary's Strip that's an affordable place, but it's it has grit, and I'm talking about the rim, of these chefs that are going to go out there and they're just going to get eaten alive.
Yeah.
Because they're paying too much in rent, their triple nuts are too high, and that scares me for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot different when it's a corporation that has 50 restaurants and they can kind of balance that number out over 50 restaurants. But, saying no is very powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
asking for what you want.
Yeah. Knowing what you want.
And saying, hey, I'm not, this is what it's going to take for me to do a deal here. If you want me, great. If you don't want me, that's okay too. I'm not going to lose it. I mean, now listen, it took me 18 years to learn that lesson. But, I mean, there was plenty of deals that I've done that I wish I would have walked away from. And
we promised a little nugget on how to use one space and to interchange restaurants in and out of that space. Any nuggets on that regard that isn't maybe as common knowledge?
I think my advice there is, and this is what I learned, probably the main lesson I learned from my restaurant in Dallas, is that we knew it was dead. And by dead, I mean it died. And we kept trying to bring it back to life and just kept trying to resuscitate it and just kept pumping more money and more money and more money. And it was fucking dead. And it wasn't coming back to life. And that taught me, when it's dead, you bury it. And then you can try to do something else, because you have a better chance of surviving as a different concept as you do as the one that's already dead. And you have to make that decision very quickly so that you don't just dump money.
When do you know it's dead? And I think I cut you short if you want to finish that train of thought.
I don't know that. I think I don't want it to be too morbid. You just fucking know.
Yeah.
It's not all of a sudden a new dish isn't going to bring it back to life. Changing the font on your menu and happy hour isn't going to bring it back to life. It's either alive or it's dead. And when it's dead, you have to say, listen, this restaurant is not going to turn around. And I have to shut it down and try to reclaim it, refurbish it, whatever. And, it's an investment. It's a risk. I mean, if I look at like say Bin 555 was open for 9 years, and I just was burned out on it. It didn't matter how badass food we were doing, people ordered the same 6 dishes. And I was like, I can't cook these 6 dishes anymore. I personally just was so burned out on it and converted it and did what I think is the coolest restaurant we've ever done with some of the best food we've ever done, if not the best food. And San Antonio just said, this restaurant sucks. We don't like it.
Yeah.
And we don't like your location and we're not coming. And so, but we already had a lease. And so it's not like we could go anywhere. And we said, you know what? Tre's a brand. It's a good brand. And we called, changed it to Tre Enoteca. And it did 4 years as Tre Enoteca. And it was just a matter of saying, okay, slap some new lipstick on that baby. And let's,
Any advice on how to get away from the previous concept stigma that might be tied to a space?
I don't think it matters. Sure, are there certain areas or certain buildings? But at the end of the day, if your food is good and it's consistent and it gives value and the service is good, you have a chance to turn it around.
I think the personal brand is what you need. Like, not the brand of your restaurant,
Right.
but like it's a Jason Dady restaurant.
Right.
We know Jason Dady
Right.
knows how to do food well. Like, this one just missed.
Right.
And if your brand has more presence than a concept, which I hope
Right.
it does,
Right.
then you should be able to recover. In my opinion.
You hope so.
Yeah.
And it's not always the case. I mean, but it's also, what is the rent structure? Is your lease almost up? Is it, do I invest in, am I having to sign another 5-year lease it's a complicated situation, because if you're losing your ass already and then you have to reinvest into repainting, new artwork, new this, new that, certainly it's a risk. But I guess if anything, the lesson to be learned is when the restaurant is dead, it's dead. Don't keep pumping money into it, because that's where you really lose your ass. And I mean, like, long term, it takes you years to come back from that. Instead of pumping an extra $75,000 into something, it would have been better just to shut it down and tell the landlord, I'm sorry, and then you deal with it from the legal side.
Yep. Okay, so COVID-19, obviously we got to give our listeners some advice on how, I don't want us to talk so much about how to react. I feel like the time to react is over.
Yeah.
Hopefully we don't get hit with another blindsided pandemic. I mean, it's always possible, but I think what's more important with our time right now is, what's your plan for the future? How have you adapted, and how can we learn from what you're going into the future, what your plan is to go into the future? I
think what it did for us is it forced us to do things that we were talking about doing for years.
Like what?
We have a commissary kitchen, a kind of our that we do commissary prep work and catering out of. Our catering company is pretty prolific, which we talk about 6 restaurants, but our catering company is equal revenue of the restaurants. And so, but we've always wanted to do these home delivery meals. We were like, listen, we have a brand. We can put together meal packages that we can deliver to people's houses. And it was always just a topic of conversation. So we immediately realized, okay, this is the time. This is the testing ground. And it'll be a part of our future forever. I mean, it'll be something that people can order online from us anytime and deliver straight to their house and drop it off at their front door. So that for us was, I think, a lot of what we got out of, quote unquote, got out of it, what we... and then just the overall efficiency of takeout and to-go, that maybe, and it's a very delicate question, because restaurants are built to be restaurants. They're not built to be delivery portals. And so and that's what we're dealing with here at this restaurant in particular is, during the shutdown, we did only takeout. We didn't shut down completely. We kept our management team on staff, and we just did takeout. Now we're reopening. We still have a lot of takeout.
Yeah.
Well, now you're busy in the restaurant, and then you're just as busy on takeout. How do you navigate that from ticket times?
So when you do open up again, are you going to be overwhelmed? Are you going to get bottlenecked?
Or the people that are sitting down in front of you that you're facing pissed because it's taking 20 extra minutes because you have 4 to-go orders in front of their ticket, and they don't see the guests. So they're like, you're not even fucking busy. And you're like, well, I know we're not busy in here, but we actually have a bunch of orders.
Yeah.
So it's a delicate, and we're still navigating that. But to answer your question, that's the future, is figuring that out and keeping it a part of the everyday business.
So obviously we're figuring it out, but what do you think, if you had to take a stab in the dark, what's your approach going to be in executing?
Limiting the amount of to-go orders versus the guests that are in your restaurant. To me, taking care of somebody in front of you takes precedent over somebody sitting in a car outside.
That's what will bring them back, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But you have to have your team trained and organized to say, hey, we've got 150 on the books tonight. We need to turn off online ordering tonight, and be able to do that.
Yeah, and I see Aloha blinking around in the background here. So, did you have to add on any features to Aloha to be able to accommodate more online ordering and delivery, or how has that experience been with Aloha?
Not my department.
Oh, okay.
That's more my wife's department. I know that we have toast at most of our locations, or have transitioned to toast mostly in most of our locations, and a lot of that is because of the efficiency of the portal from that specific avenue versus what we're getting right now with Aloha.
Was that a transition you made recently because of COVID-19, or was it in place before COVID-19?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah, I mean, I know that we've changed, like Two Bros, we changed during or we're in the process of changing from Aloha to Toast specifically because of that.
Yeah, and just another reminder, guys, Toast is offering us a special deal. We're doing our first ever CPA cost per acquisition sponsorship. So if you guys are interested in Toast, please use our link, toasttab.com/unstoppable. You'll get 1 month free service, 3 months of delivery and online ordering, and 50% off implementation. And we're going to split our commission with you. It's $2,500 after taxes. We're going to send you a check for $1,000 for saying thank you to use our link. Please let us know if you use our link, because we're technically not allowed to know when you use the portal. So tell us so we can make sure that we send you that check for $1,000, and just say thank you, and we'll say thank you back. All right, cool. Moving on. Is there anything we have not discussed up to this point that you would like to get out before we go to the speed round?
No, I think we've nailed it.
You've done awesome. One more question I ask all my guests before the speed round. The mission statement is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. How have you transformed personally over the past 20 years?
How have I transformed? I think that I've just become far more aware that it's important for your staff to be happy outside of work, for them to be happy inside of work.
I love it.
And it's a hard transition, but we just try to listen, and we try to educate ourselves, and we try to make sure that there's a lot of options out there, and that's kind of what we try to tell everybody. Is we know that any single person in this restaurant could walk out of here today, cross the street, and get hired immediately because they've worked for us. But we want to retain those people, and so we have to work a lot harder at that.
I love it, man. We're back, and the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor? A habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
Drive.
What is your biggest weakness? It's often your most biggest strength, I've noticed.
What is my biggest weakness? It's supposed to be speed round.
You're good. I'll stay here all night if I have to. I'm not in a hurry.
I hate to take a long time, because it's not like I'm afraid to say what my weaknesses are. I'm saying, what is my biggest weakness? I think my biggest weakness is trust.
Ooh, that's a tough one. How do you? I honestly, I would say the same exact thing. I have trust issues. So how do you overcome that? Give me some personal advice.
I think for me, when I think of it, what is my biggest weakness is trust. Is that I trust that you're going to do it the way that we expect you to do it, and that's a follow-up and training issue from our behalf.
Okay, got you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's I trust you that we have a saying, and I think it's an important saying, and I got it from Sang Yoon in L.A. From my father's my father's daughter, or my father's office, whatever his place is called. He says, "Hey, put that over there," I would say almost that's our second mantra is "Hey, put that over there." Nobody in your restaurant knows what that is, and they don't know where over there is. And so if you want shit done right in this business, you have to say, take that cup right there and go put it on that shelf on the second one on the left-hand side. Yeah. Because nobody knows what that is, and they don't know where over there is. And so I think a lot of times I fall into the things where I don't tell them to put that over there, or I tell them to put that over there versus being more specific.
I think it's just adopting the mentality that if somebody's not doing something wrong, the first reaction should immediately be, why? What did I do wrong to make them not do it right? And when you take that approach, then you can start to. That's when your operations manual starts to come alive, because you just slowly start to feed into it, and everything gets covered. I love that. What is one question you ask or thing you look for when you're building your team?
What's the one question I ask? We always say, what's your best meal you've ever had? just because I'm curious. Is it lowbrow? Is it highbrow? Is
Yeah.
it
Did they
grandma's
get excited?
cooking? Is it? It tells you a lot about somebody. And
I love it.
It's a great question.
What's your biggest challenge today, aside from COVID? Or you can get into maybe something relative to COVID.
No, I mean, I think it's just, it's finances. It's, COVID. If I was to tie COVID into it at all, it's COVID has exposed how fragile this business is and how
Money in,
2
money
weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks could cripple an entire industry. And so finances are always a struggle in this business, and you have to take it serious every day.
Yeah, and that's one. I'm going to give a book a plug right now, Profit First. And it's this mentality of you got to take profit first. And profit isn't your paycheck. Profit's the money that you're putting away that you never touch in case of an emergency or if you're investing in another asset, right? And again, assets are things that make you money. So it's a great book. I'll link to it in the show notes, Profit First. What is one code of conduct or behavior you teach your team? So this is a core value, a way to be, a way to act.
To ask for help.
What is one uncommon standard of service you teach your team? So this is something that's standard within the four walls of your business, but not standard throughout the industry.
Over season.
I like it. What is one book you feel restaurateurs don't... Actually, I got to go back to that. What do you mean by overseason? I don't want to assume I know what you mean.
Be aggressive, with flavor.
Okay.
Be aggressive with your personality.
Okay.
Be genuine.
Enthusiastic.
Be yourself, right? I don't care if you have gauges or tattoos or... I don't care. Come to work and love yourself. And if you love yourself and you love where you work, the guests are always going to have a great experience.
I'm happy I went back to that. What is one book that's a must-read to make us a better person or restaurant operator?
I'm a big fan of Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss.
Nice. What was one tool from that book that helped you the most?
I can't think of anything specifically, but I just love the different perspective of different people from around each. There's a lot of bullshit in there, but I think there's also a lot of good motivational stuff.
I love it.
I'm gonna have to go back now and be like, what?
We got a question coming up that might help out with that, so we'll give you a pass, or you can take it if you want.
I'll have to think about it.
Okay. Name one service you've outsourced to. So when I say service, I'm not thinking so much of a technology, but a person you go to do a thing because they're better at it than you.
What services do we use? What's an example?
We do designer and accounting, PR, marketing.
Okay, so social media.
Okay, so who do you go to?
We have a lady named Akila here locally that does kind of all of our everyday restaurant social media posts.
Does she have a business that you know the name of?
Haut, H-A-U-T. I'm going to get in trouble that I can't remember the name of it. It's Haut.
You remembered her name, which I think is more important.
It's Akila.
We'll find you.
Akila Mendez. She's awesome. But they do all of our social media posts. So we have a photographer that goes in all the restaurants, takes thousands of pictures. And then that way, every day, it's new, fresh photos based off of... I could never, we used to try to get our general managers to handle that, and it just never works, because then they're not running the restaurant, they're running a social media page.
It's a role in the restaurant that needs to exist today. It's just it has that much of a presence, and when you could outsource to that, and it's totally worth it, I
Absolutely.
think. But this is episode 723. Head over to restaurantstoppable.com/723. And we'll link to whatever the name of her company is if you're interested and you're in the San Antonio area. And the next question I have for you is, what is one thing that restaurateurs don't do well enough or often enough?
Take time off.
Yes. What is one technology you've recently adopted that's had a huge impact on your operation?
I think through COVID, probably the Toast delivery systems.
And this is the last question. It's a doozy. Get ready for it. If you got the news, you'd be leaving this world tomorrow. Yep. All the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants would be lost with your departure. With the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of our industry and for your legacy, what would those 3 pieces of wisdom be?
Who am I giving this wisdom to? anybody and everybody.
I would say the industry, or some people like to think they're giving it to their child because that's a little bit more sense. Like we should think of all as our children, right?
Be genuine.
One.
That's the most important. Find a hobby.
Two.
And party.
Three. Jason Dady, this has been a great conversation, man. We wrap up every time by calling somebody out. I actually think that's how I found you over 3 years ago. We finally made it happen. Who is somebody you respect, or two people you respect and admire and believe would be a great guest mentor like you made for us today? If they were on the show, you would listen to the episode.
Stephen Bowers, for sure. One of my closest buddies, but he's so intellectual, and he's also like punk rock, and I'm jealous of his lack of filter. I really admire that about him.
We could have a fun conversation together for sure.
And I would say somebody like Peter Siepstein from the Cookhouse, or maybe Diego Galicia from Michelin, also, smart guys that are grinding and are doing it the entrepreneur way, and they have very similar restaurant experiences that I have of coming up on my own and having to do it on their own.
That's Stefan, Peter, and Diego. Look out, guys.
Yeah.
I'm coming after you. I'd love to get you on the show. And if we want to come join your team, or maybe we're interested in learning more about you, your restaurants, what's the best way to connect?
Just jasondady.com, the classic ego website name of just yourname.com.
Jason, thank you so much, man. It's really been a pleasure to sit with you, to share your story and your knowledge. There is no questioning. You are unstoppable.
Thank you.
Cheers. If you enjoyed this video, please help us out. You can do it by liking, sharing, subscribing, and hitting that bell icon. It really helps out. And don't forget, there's a complete archive of every episode with show notes at restaurantunstoppable.com.